Now, I always like to start these sessions with this quote. Do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better. And why I like the quote is it usually aligns to the reason we've all gathered together to learn a little bit more about the ServiceNow platform, then take that knowledge, go back, apply it, and get more value out of our investment in ServiceNow. But it also aligns to the solution that we'll be talking about here today, process mining, which is designed to help you automate automate X-raying the processes on the ServiceNow platform and showing you where and how you could be doing better for anyone and everyone involved with them. What we'll do here today is we'll just do a quick little why and what of process mining and kind of where it fits inside of the continual improvement process on the ServiceNow platform. And then we'll dive into a demonstration of both how somebody might use the process mining workspace or analyst workbench to dig in and find inefficiencies with non-conforming activities within their processes and ultimately improvement opportunities. And then we'll spend some time looking at how quickly and easily you can stand up process mining inside of your organization. One of my favorite things about the solution is just how easy it is, right? And you already have the skills, right? I always like to say, if you can dodge a wrench, you can dodge a ball, or if you can build a ServiceNow report, you can visualize your processes on the ServiceNow platform. And then lastly, we'll wrap up with resources to help you get started. I do have to throw this slide up here, right? This is the slide that says, hey, anything I say and do here today can't be held against me in the court of law. It is also the slide that says, hey, as part of this conversation, if we happen to make any forward-looking statements about things that are coming on the ServiceNow platform, you should take them as such and make no decisions based on them whatsoever, because they're always subject to change. Now, with everything we do in life, whether it be an event like this one here or a business process or even a park, right, we have a vision in our head, a designed plan for how it's going to play out. And we design things, we design for both completeness and efficiency to provide the best experience possible for as many people as possible. Now, unfortunately, what we designed is not always what plays out in reality. And while this new path may be more efficient for the people trying to go from point A to point B, it certainly doesn't have a positive impact on those folks that wanted to use that grassy area to have a little picnic lunch, right? Same thing plays out with our business processes, right? We design them for both completeness and efficiency to provide that great experience possible for as many people as possible. And then we roll them out and reality kicks in, and not all the work is flowing through the optimal path. And that's going to have a negative impact on the experience of both people trying to request service inside of an organization, as well as the people that are trying to fulfill that service. Unfortunately, though, seeing the reality of what's going on within our workflows isn't always as easy and obvious as that park example I showed earlier. For many organizations, right, the continual improvement challenge is very manual, time-consuming, and costly. It may involve running a whole bunch of reports, and then for some reason, people still like to print those reports out and go through them line by line with a highlighter. It may involve holding in-person or virtual workshops in which we take a whole bunch of sticky notes, put them up on a wall. Then, of course, we have to take a picture of those sticky notes on a wall and post it to some internal site because, hey, did work really happen unless we post sticky notes on a wall somewhere? It may involve bringing in some third-party consultants who are super helpful, but they're definitely not free. And then after we get through all this, we still have to get internal alignment on the optimal path forward. At the speed in which most organizations are trying to move these days, by the time we get through all this, the optimal path forward may have already likely changed. And this is where process mining comes in. Process mining automates that process of showing you the reality of what's going on within your workflows. And now that we've got visibility into that reality, that accelerates our ability to make changes to those workflows to improve how people's experiences or the experience people are having with those workflows, right? It just allows us to become much more agile and more productive from an improvement perspective. Now, you might be saying, whoa, hold on, Dan. We've already got a whole bunch of dashboards that give us visibility into how our processes are performing. Like, how is this different? Well, those dashboards, and I hope that you're using in-platform reporting and analytics for those dashboards to answer very important questions like, how many tickets did we work? Which types of tickets were they? How long did it take to close those tickets? And probably most importantly, how are we performing against our targets? And are we improving our cycle times? Those are all really important questions that we should be asking and answering. And like I said, I hope that you're using dashboards just like this to answer those important questions. But I've been doing this a little while, and one of the things that I've learned is this, is that information tends to be one of the most addictive and contagious things out there. You give somebody a little bit and they always want more. So the first thing that happens when we get a dashboard like this out the door, before we can even start high-fiving ourselves that we got this dashboard out the door, is someone in leadership starts asking, well, why are our ESAT scores missing our targets, or our CSAT scores missing our targets? Why are our closure times trending in that direction? Like, why? All these new why questions get surfaced, and the answers to those follow-up why questions aren't always the easiest to come by. This is where process mining comes in. Process mining allows us to start asking and answering all those follow-up why questions to the things that we're seeing in our dashboards, like where is the process getting stuck? Where do we have some unnecessary rework happening in the process? Where are we spending or wasting the most time? Or my favorite one, this is a question that I've been asked so many times over the years from customers, is so much so that I've given it a name. I like to call it the finger pointing report. Everybody wants to know who's holding on to the tickets the longest. I need to know who's holding on to the tickets the longest. Or if you're a more glass half full person, we call that the opportunity to improve report. These are all the types of questions that process mining allows us to start asking and answering. Essentially, process mining allows us to start getting to the why behind all of our KPIs. And we can start applying process mining to a single table process on the platform, let's say like incident and the incident flow. Or, right, as you start to get more advanced on the platform, you might be doing things like a HR lifecycle event, like an onboarding case, where you have a high-level case and then a whole bunch of subtasks or requests that come off of that case. We can use our multi-dimensional mining capabilities to give you that end-to-end visibility into that process. Or maybe something you might be more familiar with, requests, right, where you have either requested item and then some tests associated off of that, and you want to start analyzing, is the bottleneck in the approval phase, or is the bottleneck in the task level work that's going on inside of the process? Multi-dimensional maps are great for analyzing that type of data. And then as of the Vancouver release, what we do is we have allowed our customers to start uploading external data, importing that into the ServiceNow platform, and then start mining that data as well. So in-platform data, now in Vancouver, we have external data as well. The last thing before we jump over to the demonstration is this. I just want to kind of touch on what goes into optimizing a process on the ServiceNow platform. If you think about continual improvement, there's really 4 phases: detect, analyze, improve, and monitor. And one of our advantages is that we now have all 4 of those phases on a single platform. If you think about it, in the detect phase, there's a number of things on the ServiceNow platform that help us identify when things aren't going according to plan. So for example, you might have some notifications on SLAs, or you might have some targets or thresholds set to performance analytics KPIs. These are all things that help us understand when things are going bump in the night or not going according to plan. And then when those things happen, what we need to do is we need to start digging in and analyzing why those things might be happening, and how could we potentially improve them. And that's where process mining comes in. Process mining allows us to start using things like visualized process maps, bottleneck, root cause, variation analysis. It allows us to start using those things to uncover where and how we could be doing better. Then once we understand where and how we could be doing better, we have to improve. And there's no shortage of opportunities to improve on the ServiceNow platform, right? We could, let's say process mining shines a light on an intake challenge that we're having. We potentially could use the virtual agent to improve that intake experience. Maybe process mining shines a light on situations where we have tickets that are bouncing back and forth between teams. We could potentially use predictive intelligence to help get things to the right place the first time. Sometimes process mining shines a light on situations where we have tickets that, or so we have people manually moving data from one system to another, and we could use automation engine or an RPA bot to automate away that swivel sharing that's going on. Sometimes with process mining, we just see situations in where there's a human thing that we should stop doing. For example, I had one customer where we found that they had 2 levels of approval on printer toner requests. And that second level of approval was adding 3 days to the closure time. Like, do we really need 2 levels of approval on printer toner requests? I think not. All right, so and they thought so also. So we simply removed that second level of approval. The process is now running 3 days faster. And then the last stage is the monitor stage. And this is where a lot of organizations fall down, right? They do a whole bunch of analysis, but then they never act on what they're finding. Sorry. Right, and we need to be able to kind of act on what we're finding, right? And too often those insights get lost, right? You don't realize any value unless you act. So there's applications on the platform that help us ensure that we capture, track, and prioritize the follow-up activities based on the analysis that we're doing, essentially allowing us to close the loop from a continual improvement perspective. And those applications are Continual Improvement Management and Automation Center, and you're going to see those inside of the demonstration I'm about to show. I'll just check, see if there's any questions, comments, thoughts, any questions that have come in. Or if not, I'll swap over. Nope. I'll swap over to the demo.
On questions so far.
Perfect. And I'm also just, I want to shut down my Teams here, and I noticed that my Outlook was still up. So we'll just jump over to a demo now. Now, I'm going to start this demonstration inside of performance analytics, but just be clear, you don't need to be using performance analytics to use process mining on the ServiceNow platform, but they are very complementary solutions, right? Like you saw, performance analytics helps answer the what type of stuff, but then when you want to understand why things are happening, right, you're going to want to use some process mining. So what I'm going to do is we've got this dashboard. Right from that dashboard, I'd be able to drill down into a KPI in which things might be trending in the wrong direction. And that will take us to the process optimization workspace. And what I want to run through here is I'm just going to give you a little bit of a harbor tour of what's available in this workspace so you get a sense of the level of flexibility you have to start finding inefficiencies within your processes. So what we've got here is we've mined 22,000 incidents. Those 22,000 incidents have taken 1,500 different routes to get to closure, and on average, they're taking 8 days to get there. Now, on this summary and insights page, the first thing that you're going to see is that we have a few key performance indicators that align to the incident process. These come as part of content packs that we provide for the out-of-the-box workflows running process optimization, or out-of-the-box workflows on the ServiceNow platform that we have process mining for. So in this example here, we're looking at incidents. So we give you MTTR as well as first call resolution rate. This is completely configurable. We fully expect that customers are going to create their own dashboards and place them here inside of the summary and insights page. We want to give you something to get started. And the idea is that you want to give the person doing the analysis in this workspace visibility into the higher level metrics that we're trying to impact or improve upon. Now, as I move down the screen, we get to what is my favorite part of the solution. Like, everybody loves to see the process map, but I feel like this is the most powerful pieces, these improvement opportunities. And again, these come as part of the content pack. And what they are is prepackaged common inefficiencies and non-conformant activities that we see within the processes being run on the ServiceNow platform. So for example, like, hey, of these 22,000 incidents that we mined, did you know that 14,000 of them were open and resolved by the same person? Now, depending on the process and the way you designed it, that may make sense. But in other scenarios, that may be completely weird that we have that many things being open and resolved by the same person. So we might want to dig into that non-conformant activity. Or this one here, where we have incidents that are going directly to resolved and closed. In this case, there was 1,700 of them. This is a feeding ground for self-service opportunities, right? Why are things so easy that we just move them to resolved and closed? Those should be self-service probably. I asked one customer, like, how does this even happen? And she came back to me and she said, Dan, you know what happens? Sometimes an agent takes a call, the problem's so easy, we have a knowledge article for them. So they just send them the knowledge article and they mark that ticket closed without or resolved without it ever moving to the work in progress state. And then she looked at me and she said, Dan, now that I say that out loud, it sounds like I'm paying people to be a human search engine. Maybe I just need to market my knowledge base a little bit better, right? So these tend to be opportunities to potentially drive self-service offerings in the organization. Or this one here, and this is the one that we're going to dig a little bit deeper into throughout the rest of the demonstration, these incidents that are going to awaiting caller info, right? That's slowing us down. In this case here, we have 8,400 incidents out of the 22,000 that moved into a state of awaiting caller info at some point in their life cycle. Now, the most important number on this card, though, is this 43 years. There's 43 years worth of productivity packaged up in those 8,400 incidents. right? Even if we could just get 1% of that 43 years back, that's a huge win for us from an organizational perspective. Right, so we'll want to dig in and see if we can start deflecting things from that specific state of the process. Now, why I like these so much, these improvement opportunities, is not only do we give you some out of the box, but I always like to compare these to when I was playing hide and seek as a kid. Like when I was playing hide and seek as a kid at home, I had a home field advantage. I knew the 2 or 3 best hiding spots. So when I was way more efficient at finding my friends than they were at finding me. The same is true for most of our customers. Most of our customers, they have a pretty good idea of where their process inefficiencies are. They just haven't had a good way to capture the data in a form in which that allows them to communicate the impact of those inefficiencies. These improvement opportunities and giving our customers the ability to create their own rule-based improvement opportunities gives them a vehicle to help them capture the data they need to prioritize where to act next. Right? There's going to be no shortage of process improvement opportunities within an organization. Having data to quantify the impact really is useful when you start trying to prioritize things. Now, as I move down the screen from the improvement opportunities, we get to what is known as variation analysis. And what this allows us to do is look at all of those individual 1,500 routes that these incidents took to get to closure. And I can look at the routes by, let's say, the route that was taken most often. So I can see here, or my favorite one to do is the ones that have the most steps involved in them. We're looking at a situation or a project here in which we decided to use state and look at state transfers to identify inefficiencies. I'll show you another one a little bit later on. We look at how things are moving through different assignment groups. And I've actually, one customer we were working with, we turned this on and we looked at this example for assignment groups. We looked at most steps. We found a ticket that went through 84 different assignment groups. Like, how is that even possible? Now, whereas variation analysis looks at the entire route for us or helps us identify opportunities from a route perspective, bottleneck analysis allows us to look at the individual transfers or handoffs or transitions within a given route or process. And we can start looking at these transitions by the ones that are taking the longest on average or the ones that are happening most frequently or most often. All of this on this summary and insights page are just designed to help jumpstart us on our analytics journey or our journey in terms of trying to identify some process inefficiencies and non-conformant activities that we should be acting upon. In terms of the most interesting things that we've seen, I've kind of mentioned a couple of them. That 2 levels of approval on printer toner was kind of interesting. That 84 different assignment groups that one ticket touched was pretty interesting. One example, though, I'll give you from one of our customers. Is they turned this on, and within the first couple of hours of looking at the data, they identified a situation in which they had a catalog item for people to put people in groups, basically Active Directory groups, and it was a completely automated process. But when that automation failed in putting people in the group, it created a manual task for somebody to go and follow up on it. And what they found is that was failing on average about 2,200 times a month, creating 2,200 manual tasks. And my math is going to be off here, so I'm not going to tell you what each of the tasks' average duration was, but essentially those 2,200 tasks equated to 7 years worth of productivity that was being spent to address just putting people in Active Directory groups. And when they looked into it, they just looked at the form and they found that, you know what, all we need to do is put a rule in there to ensure that people can only put people in the groups that they're supposed to, or in the same domains, essentially. So one simple form change saves them 2,200 tickets or 7 years worth of productivity a month. All right, and then I thought that was powerful enough. And then the customer came back to me and said, but to double down on that, Dan, it was a double inefficiency because people were calling the service desk to check the status of those manual tasks that were being created. So just that simple form change that they made saved them the 7 years, but then also saved some service desk calls as well. So that was I thought, a pretty powerful insight that they found, and then we're able to quickly act upon using process mining out there. I hope that helped. I hope I answered the right question. All right, now let me just kind of clear this. Let's dive into the map and do a little bit of a kind of harbor tour on this screen for folks. So a lot of power on the summary and insights page, and then we'll jump over here to the analyst workbench or the map itself. And I'll again kind of walk you through what's going on here. So what we got is our 22,000 incidents on average, one week and one day to get to closure, and then these 1,500 routes that I keep talking about. And you might be saying to yourself, whoa, hold on, Dan. That doesn't look like 1,500 routes. And you'd be right, because by default, we're just showing you the top 20%. But I could very quickly expand this out, and the map is going to get really messy really fast. And if there's anybody with the word governance or risk in their title, when they see a map like this, they get really scared, because each one of those individual lines is a potential risk exposure or non-conformant activity. Now I'm going to bring this back to something a little bit more manageable and then just zoom in a little bit so we can start looking at what's on the map itself. Now, if we look at this, what's going on here is we're just looking at state analysis, and I'm going to build one of these a little bit later on, or configure one. It's going to take a couple of minutes, so you'll see how we get these on the map. But the idea is we're just looking at the volume and the velocity in which things or incidents in this case are moving through the different states in the process. And if we didn't want to look at the unique occurrences in the average duration, we wanted to look at it, let's say, by total duration or total occurrences, we could change what we're seeing in between the different nodes. Now, the first time I saw one of these maps, I had no idea what I was looking at. And the question about the challenge is, in many cases, that's a challenge for our customers too, is that process mining is a new muscle for all of us. So it's kind of like, how do we use process mining in some cases is one of the things that one of the reasons we're having this webinar, is to kind of make people aware that process mining exists and kind of expose some of the things it could help answer. But the first time I saw a map, no idea what I was looking at, but it kind of reminded me of ski trails. And if I think back to when I was skiing, anytime I started going down the mountain and had to go back up the mountain for any reason, certainly wasn't the best experience for me, and it definitely wasn't the fastest way to get down the mountain. All right, so whenever I look at these maps, the first thing I start looking for is I start looking for lines that are potentially going back up the hill in the process, right? Those lines going back up the hill are things that represent some form of rework in the process. So if we go on in here, we want to look at this, where I've got a waiting caller info to in progress. In this case here, I've got 2,700 incidents that went from the state of awaiting caller info back to the state of in progress. Not only do I have 27 unique occurrences, that I have 3,300 total occurrences of that. So there's 700 tickets that potentially took that trip more than once. In fact, I have one incident that took that trip of awaiting caller info back to in progress 9 times. And probably the most important number is this 19 years. There's 19 years worth of time or productivity packaged up in just things going from awaiting caller info to the in progress state. Again, can we get a little bit of that time back? The interesting thing here, though, is awaiting caller info to in progress is really like 1/2 of a complete loop, right? It doesn't just start in awaiting caller info, it has to get there. So what we can do is we can use this bottleneck analysis to come in here and say, hey, let me look at all the different state transitions that involve awaiting caller info. And I can find this one that we were just looking at, the 19 years. But here's the other half of that, right? The in progress to awaiting caller info. And what I do is I find 22 years. So there's 41 years worth of time packaged up in things that go into the awaiting caller info state. So maybe I just want to look at only the tickets that go into awaiting caller info. So I can click on the node, and I can just to say apply transition, and it narrows it down to only the tickets that touch awaiting caller info at some point in their life cycle. And now I've narrowed it down to these 8,400. And then at this point, I can start using my breakdowns on the left-hand side of the screen to start slicing and dicing these 8,400 incidents that go into awaiting caller info. I can look at them by assignment group, reassignment count, priority, category. Any way that you've structured your data, you can start slicing and dicing the map by that. Now, if I think about awaiting caller info, I always say, wait a minute, if I could get better information up front, I might not need to go back to the user for additional information. So let me look at the intake experiences and see if there's a way to improve those. So I can see that the majority of these tickets going into awaiting caller info are self-service and portal. Okay. But this email one, there's a whole additional week of time packaged up in tickets that come in via email and go into awaiting caller info. Like, what's going on there? So maybe I want to just analyze those. So I can filter it down to those things that come in via email and go into awaiting caller info. And it kind of makes sense, right? You know, that email's a pretty unstructured channel. You'd expect a little bit of back and forth, but a whole week, come on, we can do better. Now what I can do is I can start looking at, maybe I want to use this histogram to say, hey, I only care about the things that go into awaiting caller info 2 times, 3 times, 4 or 5. Maybe because I'm in the platform, I have the ability to drill down and get to the detailed records, right? To look at those 1,300. And I don't know if you remember this, but I mentioned earlier that information tends to be one of the most addictive and contagious things out there. One of the beauties of the platform is now that I'm here, I can start using platform capabilities. And if I want to ask more questions about this in a single click, I can launch interactive analysis. This has nothing to do with process mining. This is just a platform capability that allows me in a single click to take a set of data and turn it into an interactive dashboard. So if I want to continue to have a conversation with the data that around the incidents that have come in via email, went into a waiting call or info at some point in the life, I can use this dashboard to do that. The other thing that I'll call out, I'll just bring it back here, on this list, right? You notice when I said, hey, let's launch interactive analysis, I also have the option to launch process optimization. So if I wanted to mine this data, right, and just look at these 1,300s, create a map and get some improvement opportunities, like you saw me running through so far, in a single click, I could go from here to the configuration to drive into that mining exercise. Maybe at this point, right? Okay, I dug through some of the data, but you know what? Maybe I want to start getting some value out of all the gold that lives in the unstructured data inside of those tickets, like the short descriptions and descriptions. I can start using my cluster analysis on the short descriptions and descriptions of those tickets to see if there's any trends or patterns. And it looks like there's some opportunity here around cost center changes, or maybe I want to look at my higher quality clusters to see if there's anything that's really tightly linked together. And I see these 33 here that are just people trying to update their email address in their profile. Now, that seems like something I should have a catalog item for, or virtual agent conversation. And if I do have those things, guess what? I probably should be marketing them a little bit better because people are sending emails about those. So now that I've identified that process improvement opportunity or potential opportunity, I can do a couple of things. One is I can come over here and I can add a note and say, like, hey, at Able, you know what? Take a look at intake experience for updating email in profile, attach a snapshot, hit post. This will send a notification to Able. There'll be a link. He'll click on it. It'll bring him right into this project. And if he hits the preview button, it'll take him right to this place in the analysis that I was doing. Or right from here, I've got a direct link into Continual Improvement Management and Automation Center. And the idea here ties back to that closed loop continual improvement experience that I was talking about earlier, right? Like I found this insight. I don't know if I'm going to be able to act on it right away. And I want to make sure it doesn't get lost in the shuffle. Like, it's something we should be doing eventually. So this allows us to do is make sure it gets captured in a record on the platform. That way it gets tracked, prioritized, and followed up on. So again, closing the loop. And these are really important if you want to start holding people in the organization accountable to actually acting on the insights they're finding. Like I mentioned earlier, insights are great, but unless you act on them, you recognize no value from those insights. All right, a couple of other things that I want to show you here. One is we've got this compare option. So, maybe I want to start comparing. Like, we got two different teams, but they're doing the same process or working the same process. And I want to look side by side on how one team is performing versus another. Or if I want to look at, say, hey, actually, I just heard a story about at ServiceNow where we had one team that looked like they were performing differently than others based on the process data that we looked at. And it turns out one of the reasons that was slowing this other team down was that adding a day to their closure time is that we were assigning them work on a holiday in that location or that region of the world. So this side-by-side comparison allows us to start looking at how different regions, vendors, whoever it might be, are performing from a process perspective and doing some comparison analysis. It also allows us to start looking at how the process is changing over time. So you can actually take a project, schedule it, and that way we start looking like, hey, how does the process performing this week versus last week? And I want to see where the changes are within the process. Or you make a change to a process and you want to see how that's impacting other areas of the process. So comparison, super helpful. I always like to show this example. This ties back to that finger pointing example that I was talking about earlier, right? So we were just looking at a whole example in which we were analyzing state transitions, like how things were moving through different states in the process. You can configure the projects in different ways. And this time I configured the project to look at assignment group transitions. And you'll notice that my improvement opportunities are different, right? So instead of looking at things that or opportunities as it pertains to states. Now I'm looking at opportunities that it pertains to assignment groups. And I can see that I've got incidents that are going through 2 or more reassignments, in this case, a multi-hop issue. My variation analysis now looks a little bit different. So I can start looking at the routes that were most taken, or like I was mentioning earlier, my favorite one is looking at tickets that are jumping through multiple assignment groups to get to closure. This is where I saw that one example of 8,400, or not 8,400, sorry, 84 different groups that touched a ticket, which seems crazy. But my favorite way to look at this is to use the map itself. Right. And with every customer that you turn this on, or every customer that we look at, the first view of the assignment group map is always going to look like an onion that got stepped on, because there's usually a whole bunch of level 1s that then farm it out to different level 2s. So the highest volumes are going into those level 1s, but I could expand this map out and it's going to get a little bit messier, a little bit more involved. But the idea here is, right, now that I've got this map, I can start looking at how work is moving from one team to another and how long it might be taking. And again, the map itself is going to get pretty busy. So what you can do is you can use this variation analysis to start looking for different transfer paths between the teams. And I can come over here and say, you know what, maybe I'm only interested in situations in where it's going through X number of transfers. And you know what, I want a little bit of meat on the bone from an analytics perspective. So let's just say there's more than 10 records or 10 situations where that happens, and hit apply. And what this will do is it'll narrow this map down to these situations and apply to that. And I find this one set of records, these 26 incidents that are on average are taking 1 month and 17 days. And it looks like they're going from IT Support Americas to Support IT back to IT Support Americas. Like, okay, that's great. Certainly interesting. Like, do we need to go back to Support IT America or IT Support Americas? I'm not sure. But like, who's holding on to the tickets the longest in this scenario? So I can hit apply, and I can narrow it down to see, all right, it takes 13 minutes to get assigned to the first group. That first group is now holding on to it for an average of 1 day. That second group, though, is holding on to it on average for 4 weeks, or a month before they get it back to that second group or the initial group. So there we go. We've identified who's holding on to the tickets the longest. To me, this is one of those questions that I've watched customers struggle to answer over the years. Is like, are there inefficiencies in how we're moving work throughout the organization? And process mining does a great job of highlighting where those opportunities are and where you potentially could be focusing on either adjusting some assignment rules or using predictive intelligence to get things to the right place, or just looking for opportunities to streamline the process. For example, I had one customer, when they started looking at this data, they found that they had a certain team in which their average closure time for their tickets was 3 days, which is really good, for the work that they were trying to do. But what they noticed is that a full day of that time was just burned before it even got assigned to anyone. They just lost a whole day. And the way that they had set things up was that people had to go pick up the work. The work wasn't being pushed to them. So what they decided to do, and that was costing, I think, about 700 days a year, I think they told me. But anyway, what they decided to do is that they just had never implemented round robin assignment, and now they've got round robin assignment going, and they're noticing a considerable improvement in that 1 day of the first part of that process, right? So just identifying opportunities, where we can save some time in every step of the process, whether it be state transfers, assignment group handoffs, or just assigning the work. Last thing I want to just run through second to last thing, is like, okay, a lot of power here, right? And you saw on the slides, we can do this. I just showed incident examples, but you can certainly apply this to HR cases. You can apply this to customer service cases. If you built your own application with Append, you can apply it there. We've just released in Vancouver the ability to apply this to strategic portfolio management. So idea, demand, project, field service management is another use case that you see. So you can apply this across things. And as I mentioned, again, that ability to start applying this in Vancouver to external data. So this example here is we pulled audit level data from our smart recruiter system here at ServiceNow. And we're now looking at, we use process mining to look at that data and how things are moving through the different steps in our hiring process to see if there's any areas for improvement. All right. Now, this is my favorite part of the exercise, right? People see it and they say, Dan, this looks amazing. Like, how hard is this to do? Well, I'm going to show you. So what we'll do here is we'll just create our first project. And we'll use my incident data, but we're going to call this Vivid. And I could align a dashboard to the project if I wanted to. So I'll come in here, and any dashboard that's been configured in your platform analytics workspace would show up in this list. I've got this one here. I hope that's the right one, and we'll hit save. And now what I have to do is I have to say, what table do I need to mine? And any table that has auditing turned on for it is going to be available to me. So I come in here, I know I've got audit data, and it's turned on by default for about 140 so tables on the platform. And now what do? Well, I need to start narrowing down or scoping the data that I want to mine. Best practice dictates that we kind of only mine closed work, right? If you're trying to do analysis of how long it's taking for things to get done, you want to look at work that has completed the process. Could you blend together open work and closed work? You certainly could, but it's going to kind of skew the numbers that you're looking at. So let's just say active is false. And then at this point, you just start saying, well, maybe I only care about machine generated incidents or human generated incidents or things that are coming in via email, or this category of ticket that I want to look at, or for this time frame. But you just start scoping the data to answer the questions that you need to answer. I'm going to leave it as just active as false for now. The only other thing you absolutely have to do is come in here and say, well, what activity do I want to track in the process? So, an activity is things that are changing on the record, right? So we've looked at two examples here. We looked at one in which we did state as the activity, another where we did a project that had assignment group as the activity. You could blend those together. You could mix and match. You could use, let's say, some people use this to look at how things are being recategorized inside of the organization or reprioritized. We have things that are starting out as P1s and then being downgraded or being switched from priority within the process because people are trying to stop the SLA counter or SLA timer. So again, activity is just something that's changing, and we've configured that. Now, we could be done, but of course, we're going to want to slice and dice this map by different things. So let's add some breakdowns. We'll just come in here, we'll add category, right? Super simple. You can have up to 10 breakdowns per project. You don't really have to do anything. Those of you that have worked with performance analytics over the years, you know that creating a breakdown is not exactly the most straightforward thing. That's it. That's all you have to do here. At this point, we're done. I come in here, I say, go to project definition, and I click the mine button. And what's going to happen now is it's going to take that criteria that we just put in, that active is false. It's going to go out. It's going to harvest the relevant data from the audit logs, package it up, and then spit it over to the machine learning infrastructure to do the heavy duty number crunching. This ensures that we have no impact on the performance of the instance whatsoever. All the number crunching is going on right now. That's going to take anywhere from 30 seconds to a couple of minutes, depending on the volume and stuff that we're doing. But once that number crunching is done, it's going to take that model, spit it back to the instance, and away you go. That's what it takes, right? It's not this big, huge, heavy lift. Like, this is one of those things that from a customer perspective, you can turn on and get going and start seeing opportunities to improve what you're doing on the ServiceNow platform in a matter of minutes in most cases. Where the real work comes in is, one, interpreting the results of these maps. Like, what am I seeing in the data? That takes effort. Digging into where you see the inefficiencies in the map, that takes some effort and some work. And then obviously the follow-up of like, all right, I've now interpreted what the map is telling me and where there might be some opportunities, but what do we do about it? Like, hey, what changes do I need to make to my process to start reclaiming some of that inefficiencies? So that's what it takes to kind of get going. Really straightforward, really easy to get a level of visibility that most customers have been looking for a long time. In terms of like, where do you start? Which process do you look at? I always recommend starting with, it's going to depend on the workflow, but state and assignment group are the two best places to start mining. Those improvement opportunities that show up automatically with the content packs, they're going to give you some direction. But there's three kind of, I would say, common areas or common opportunities, I would say, across almost every workflow. One is, if you do a state analysis, looking at things that go into the on hold state, right? And just isolating those and seeing if there's any patterns there, because on hold is slowing you down. Or reopened work, right? That's a very common one. Let's look at the reopened work and see, or reopened or on hold, awaiting customer info. Those are good areas to start. That assignment group example is a very good one to start with as well, right? Things that are ping-ponging between teams or taking long to get from one team to another. There's always opportunities to improve in those situations. So on hold and on hold reason, rework of any sort, and ping-ponging or different teams. And actually that leads me to this this slide here, which is like, hey, what do I do next after this? One, just know that there's a process optimization essentials course on the Now Learning site. So that's a good place to get started. It's about 90 minutes, self-paced training, 45 if you do it at 2x speed. But it's a good place to get started. We have a great Now white paper out there about how we're using process mining at ServiceNow. It walks through kind of what is process mining, how we got started, and some of our initial findings on some of our ServiceNow workflows, which is pretty good. There's a community forum out there called Process Mining. It's called Process Mining now, just so you know. In Vancouver, we renamed process optimization to process mining. So if you're searching for process mining and you don't find something, maybe search for process optimization, and vice versa, because not everything has been transferred over from a name perspective. My slide's a good example of that. I've been hosting for about a year and a half now something called the Process Mining Academy. So once a month, we host a 1-hour webinar on a specific aspect of process mining. There's about 18 or so recorded sessions out there. You can find those on the ServiceNow community site, or just search up ServiceNow Process Mining Academy. You'll get a lot of useful information there. That's a great place to kind of get started. And if you really want to go deep, there's lots of content there. I mentioned earlier, one of the things that we've learned is probably the best way to say it is, just like the question you asked, Gary, is like, where do we start? And that's a question many customers have. So since it's a new muscle for a lot of folks, we started something called a use case series. So these are short little 5-minute examples of how to do that ping pong analysis I was just showing you, or how to look at tickets that are breaching SLA with process mining, or how to look at things that are taking longer to route than resolve. And so it walks through kind of how to do the analysis, but also how to configure the projects. I think we got about 7 or 8 of those use cases out there. Again, that's on the community site. And then lastly, there's a live on now session called Getting Started with ServiceNow's in-platform process mining. That walks through all the building blocks, like, hey, what plugins do you need to turn on? What is an activity? What is a breakdown? Right? All the terminology you need to know. And then it walks through creating the project like we just did. So these are all useful resources. They're out there on the community site and available for you if you want to learn a little bit more above and beyond today. That concludes my prepared content. I'm happy to stay and answer as many questions as people have. That's a good question. I think it's about thinking about what type of question you want to answer. Right? It might not be in the wrench turning of configuring the project. I think too many folks, when they see a solution like this, they say, well, I'm just going to point it at all my data and see what it tells me, which is, that's one way to go about it. And it could tell you a bunch of things, but in some ways, it's almost like better to start scoping your project up front in terms of saying like, okay, well, what KPI am I focusing on improving? And what data impacts that KPI? And then let's create a project that kind of targets our analysis a little bit better. Like, so I'll give you an example. SE task, right? The tasks that are associated to catalog items. You could point and mine all of your catalog items. And you say, look at the SE task, just look at the SE task table for everything. But every item is going to have a different workflow potentially, or a different set of work to it. So is it really the best analysis to do? Like, you may want to scope your project and say, let's just look at a specific item and the tasks associated for that specific item. And that's probably going to be a much more efficient use of time and help you identify an opportunity to improve it much quicker, rather than looking at the larger set of data holistically. I mean, that's a situation where using both reporting and analytics on the platform combined with process mining is a huge win. You could do something like, hey, use performance analytics to show you your top 10 requested items from a closure time perspective, and which ones are trending in the wrong direction. And then say, okay, I've identified those 10. Now let me go create a process mining project for each of those 10 and the tasks associated with them, and see if it's an approval piece or it's the task piece. So I don't know that it's a challenging part in terms of the actual wrench turning of creating the project. The challenging part in some cases is scoping the project effectively up front, and then like looking through the map for opportunities. I hope to see some of you at future process mining academies, knowledge, wherever our paths may cross. I'm always happy to get engaged in a conversation about this.